Morning. So as Pastor Kevin was saying, I'm from Hillcrest, and for those of you who might not know, Hillcrest has been around for 100 years. So 100 years ago, the school was started, and Hillcrest came out of the Bible school that was started at the Church of Lutheran Brethren. And the Bible school was started really from some revivals that were going on, and young people were really starting to have this passion to follow the Lord, but they needed some training and learning how to do that, so they founded the Bible school. And then there was kind of a desire for students to actually build a biblical view of the world. And so Hillcrest was started as a high school department. Up until that time, back in the day, you'd go to grade school, and then after grade school, you'd look maybe for a trade or something of that nature. High school was advanced learning, and not everyone went. And so Hillcrest, started by the Church of Lutheran Brethren 100 years ago, was really to help students take on their faith, make it their own, but then also understand the world. How has God designed the world? So looking at chemistry, how has God built it? And I want to give you a perspective of kind of how we view that a little bit so that you have an understanding of what's been going on for 100 years at the school. So when we look at something like chemistry, it's not just the sense of looking at the chemicals and how they react and how God's designed them to react, but it's really understanding the character of God in that. And so the character of God is one that interacts with the world, that has structure and organization to how he interacts. And so for our students, as they come in, they'll get a chance to really understand that. You're going to watch a video of a student, that's a student testimony. Her name's Hannah Indested, and she's been in our classes. So she went through chemistry this year at Hillcrest as a junior, and she came from Seattle. And so she heard every day in chemistry that God has a plan and an organization. We find that in Scripture. So as she's sitting down with her chemistry book open, her Bible's open as well. And so the teacher's talking about these chemical compounds and how they interact. And at the same time, he's calling the students to look back into Scripture to say, are there any other places where God interacts in places? So when people bow their knee to the Lord, he does something. God does something to nations and to people when they bow their knee to the Lord. And in the same way, when we look at chemistry, when different things interact, something happens, and God has organized the world to operate this way. And so she went from then chemistry into history class, and she heard that same concept. When people bow their knee to Jesus, something happens. And so at Hillcrest, she learned that the study of history isn't just kind of cool old dead people that we're going to look at and study, but she actually got a chance to see what happens when a nation bows its knee to Jesus, and what happens when a nation doesn't. So in the foundation of the United States, there were people in that revolution and kind of reform on government, they bowed their knee to the Lord and spent a lot of time in prayer. And side by side, you have in France a revolution that's going on that really is devoid of that same emphasis on God. And so when you're studying history, you're looking at what happens when people bow their knee to Jesus and what happens when people don't. Nations rise and fall by as Benjamin Franklin says in Constitutional Convention, God notices this, and he notices a sparrow when it falls. And so she had a chance to understand and study these different concepts. And then she'd go to mathematics, and there's no God in mathematics. I just can tell you that right now. Mathematics is awful. There is no God in mathematics. No, I'm just joking. Algebra made me think that, but then I started to study a little bit more, and it's not true. Because there's a need, again, kind of same thing with chemistry. There's a need for God to organize the world. When you look at the world, there's no accident. This is not a probability that, hey, out of 10 million or 110 million or whatever number you want to come up with, there's no way that it could be an accident. And when you study algebra and you study mathematics, you see that's really, some people will say, that's the language of God is mathematics. You don't have anything in the world without mathematics. You can't have matter, space, density, time, energy, all of that needs mathematics. And so some people will say, as much as I hate to admit it, that mathematics is the language of God. It's really cool. And so Hannah had a chance to see God in her science classes, see God in her math classes, see God in all of these different settings. And then literature came around, and she's opening up really Uncle Tom's Cabin, A Tale of Two Cities, The Scarlet Letter. And the way that our English prof approaches it is the Bible's side by side with those. So any truth that you find in the Scarlet Letter, any kind of bravery that you might see in like Red Badge of Courage and how we deal with lying, all of those things come and have their foundation in Scripture. So anything that's good and beautiful and trustworthy and right, and we should think about such things, the scripture says, has its foundation in the Bible. So as we read man's writings, we might come to a different understanding of it or approach it from a different way, but you'll understand, hey, when we look at the Scarlet Letter and we see what happens when some people fall into sin and they're dealing with guilt, what ends up coming out is, hey, let's take some time and look in the Bible. Is there anyone else that you can think about in Scripture that has this issue? And so their teacher will say, let's look at David and what happened with David and Bathsheba and what does he do with his guilt and how does he deal with it? And so in all of these things, kind of integrating faith and culture and learning, this intellect, this academia, the students really get a chance to build a biblically based view of the world, and it really changes their life. And so Hillcrest is really for kids 7th grade through 12th grade. That's what God has set us up to do. 9th through 12th come and live on campus in a boarding environment. We have students from around the world, Norway, Korea, South America, and then throughout the United States. And they come and they get a chance to live in that kind of culture and that environment, but they also can't get away from us because they live on campus. So there's a lot of faith formation, a lot of mountaintops that you go on, really great days, and then you go down into a valley, and that's where God does the work, as we read in Psalm 23. God does some character formation in those valleys. And I want to show you now Hannah's little video of Hannah's testimony, and thanks for letting me come here and kind of share a little bit of the ministry that God has established through our synod, and thank you for your support of Hillcrest. And I'd love to visit with you afterwards if you want to talk at all. So thank you.